The first chapter of study in political science, there's a different chapter title for the book, but I really like to summarize this first chapter. What does the average American think about government? Now, first, you have to start with an introduction, and I know that sometimes you can see information like this that is very much an introduction, things you've heard before, and think, I already know this, why are we doing it? Well, the beginning stages of any course is often review. So forms of government, you have authoritarian governments where complete power is in the hands of one individual. You have an oligarchy where power is in the hands of an elite aristocracy. Then you have democracy where power is in the hands of the people. This is often summarized as majority tyranny. We really don't have any pure democracies in the world anymore. The best historical example would be ancient Athens. And then you have a republic, which is probably the most common form of government in the world today, particularly that the United States is familiar with, because not only are we a republic, but so are many of our allies. Some historical examples: Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, both authoritarian leaders. Ancient Sparta was probably the most famous oligarchy in history. Direct democracy in ancient Athens, and democracy is often jokingly referred to as two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Just a joke, but really that's the whole point of the term majority tyranny. And then, of course, you have America and our republic, which really is a model for the rest of the world, in that a lot of republican forms of government around the world are very much based around our Constitution, our Declaration, our founding documents. This is a term, this is one of the first things that you're going to find to be extremely new, like something you've never heard before. This term, political efficacy. And the belief is that the average citizen can actually have an influence in the government. The belief that your government is going to listen to you if you have something to say. Now, this is something that has slipped over time, in that not a lot of people think that the government takes them seriously, cares what they think. There's a trust in government poll that really reflects this. In the 1960s, between 55 and 75% of the citizens in the United States trusted our government always, or at least most of the time. That had dropped to 25% by 1980, when Jimmy Carter was president and the economy was really struggling. By 1994, it was down to 22%. This is around the time that Bill Clinton is president, and a lot of people were very critical of our welfare system, and therefore one of the big agenda items of the Clinton presidency was welfare reform. And by 2011, this is down to 10%, and this is again due to a sluggish economy, and President Obama happened to be president at the time for that. You can see, graphically speaking, this trust in government poll over time. The only real upticks were during the stronger economy in the 1980s under President Ronald Reagan. And shortly after 9/11, the nation was rather unified behind President George W. Bush. And then the war on terror took a turn for the worse. Eventually, the financial crisis took a serious toll on opinion in government. So general trends. But you can see that in the 1960s, 75% or more of people prior to Vietnam having gone so badly, that a majority of people, overwhelming majority of people, really did trust their government always or most of the time. This is a term you will hear me refer to throughout the course. You probably already heard me refer to it in U.S. history in junior year, and that is civic virtue. That people believe in the betterment of society through their individual actions, sometimes involving self-sacrifice. So people believing in civic virtue will lead to things being better without the need for government influence. The best way for political efficacy, so the feeling that we really do have an impact on our elected officials, that they will listen to us, is by practicing civic virtue and being civically minded. Some good examples would be making sure that you are an active voter. If there's anything politicians pay attention to, it is actively voting citizens. Volunteering in various organizations. You can see the photo below of folks that are volunteering at a soup kitchen, providing meals to those who need them. And there are various forms of public service. You could join the military. You could yourself become an elected official. You could serve. Technically, I, as a teacher, am a public servant because I work for Lafayette Central Schools, which falls under the state education department. So there are many, many ways that you can be a servant to the public and have civic virtue. Now, political participation has also changed over time. In the early republic, there were a lot of landowning requirements in order to vote. However, by the time Andrew Jackson is running for office, not only in the election of 1824, but then again when he runs in 1828, and then is reelected in 1832, he lost his very first time out in 1824. Right around this period of Andrew Jackson, you have property ownership requirements being taken away, and being a adult male citizen was enough. Today, all adult citizens over the age of 18, men and women alike, can vote, thanks to changes to the Constitution via constitutional amendments. And one of those amendments in 1971 actually lowered the age for voting from 21 to 18. So all adult citizens over the age of 18 can vote today. And exercising this right is the key to having influence over the government. You must be an active voter if the government is to take you seriously. John Locke and Enlightenment thinkers like him had a heavy influence on Thomas Jefferson when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson was a strong believer in Locke's theories of natural rights, like land, liberty, property. That the government's really only role was to protect natural rights, and that government's power is derived directly from the consent of the governed, and if the governed, so citizens, are not happy, then they can demand new government. These are all things that are summarized in the Declaration of Independence, and have these ideas of Lockian natural rights at heart nearly all the time. John Locke, of course, known for his 2 treatises on government. This concept of pluralism is very similar to what James Madison referred to as factions when he wrote some of the Federalist Papers in support of ratification of the Constitution. Really, interests, if they are competing with each other for influence in the government, no one group is ever going to get too much authority because they're all trying to compete with each other. And this competition is in fact a good thing because it leads to compromise. So in modern politics, this is referred to as pluralism, and it is very similar to what James Madison, in primarily Federalist Number 10 and 51, referred to as factions at work. Liberty versus equality. This is an ongoing debate all the time in politics. Liberty is, of course, boiled down to basically freedom from government control. Equality is harder to define. Some folks mean equality, everyone should be the same, everyone should have a similar life. That's not really what Jefferson and signers of the Declaration of Independence, when they said all men are created equal, what they mean. And you can agree or disagree with their meaning of equality, but their meaning of equality is equality of opportunity and political equality. So, equality of opportunity meaning that people could use their talents and the resources available to them to reach their full potential. That's why instead of life, liberty, and property, it is worded life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration. Also political equality, voting rights for all, equality under the law, equal treatment in legal proceedings is how they define equality under the law. Obviously, the biggest missing piece in early U.S. government is voting rights for all. People had been, for generations, systematically excluded, whether that be due to land owning requirements or later during the period of Reconstruction after the Civil War. Blacks are denied their right to vote simply due to things like literacy test requirements or poll taxes. And obviously we've come a long way now in the modern world, these things, equality of opportunity and political equality, really do have so much more meaning to us today than they did for exploited generations in the past. Can equality be enforced? So examples would be redistribution of wealth through things like welfare, unemployment, food stamps, programs provided by the government, affirmative action favoring one group over another in hiring practices, or defining things as hate crimes. To murder someone, you could also get a hate crime charge if that person happened to be from a minority group. There's a saying by Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, a very well-known critique of American Republican democracy, and he says that Americans are so enamored by equality that they would rather be equal in slavery than unequal in freedom. And there is some truth to this, in that sometimes people are envious of others, and it leads to a desire for pure, everyone should have a similar lifestyle equality that would require sacrificing a lot of individual freedom and liberty to achieve. And that's an age-old debate that will probably never disappear in American government. And one of the assignments that we will do in class asks, should America export democracy? What's our role in the world? Are we the best? Pushing democracy in places like Korea and Vietnam when we fought wars in these places. South America when we tried to influence Latin American governments. Are we justified in overthrowing another government like we did via nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan during the War on Terror? How should our foreign policy be conducted? Should it be a traditional Washingtonian neutrality, isolationism, and only focusing on diplomacy? Or could it be more of an interventionism that has very much been the case since the end of World War II in the United States, and our focus on our own national security, which would require us to intervene in other parts of the world at times? You can see with a final slide here with some images that on the left, it was an awful symbolic moment when this photo was taken, and one of the first democratic elections in Iraq in generations, yet It also included a woman, which in their culture was not common for women to have very many rights at all, let alone voting rights. But that all comes at a cost. As you can see, these service members having lost limbs while fighting the war on terror. So really it comes down to this question: should America export democracy? Should we try to influence the rest of the world? And this is an assignment that we will do in class. If you have any questions on this Chapter 1 lecture, of course feel free to reach out.